This video is sponsored by World Anvil. Vecna, Demogorgon, Strahd von Zarovich. Outside of all getting name-dropped on Stranger Things, what do these villains have in common? They are exactly the kind of enemy you can structure an entire D&D campaign around. Curse of Strahd and Vecna Eve of Ruin are official hardcover releases from Wizards of the Coast where the entire adventure is designed to lead up to an epic final confrontation with one of these iconic villains, whose names are literally in the title of the book. Tyranny of Dragons has you fighting a dragon cult and ends in a final battle against the five-headed dragon goddess Tiamat. Tomb of Annihilation ends with a pitched battle against the Archlich Acererak. Out of the Abyss includes an epic encounter against legendary demon lords like Demogorgon or Orcus. And we could absolutely have a larger conversation about the execution of some of these ideas. Maybe we will someday down the road, but the point is, so many Dungeon Masters have this bucket list of campaigns they want to run, and a lot of them are structured around defeating some iconic evil villain. So much so that the players would literally be dealing with the enemy as early as level 1, fighting their vile minions throughout several different adventures, and by the end of the campaign they would meet this iconic foe on the field of battle in an epic, high-level finale. That's exactly why so many of the official adventures from the last 12 years are written this way, because a lot of game masters want to give their players that experience. And in truth, a lot of people kind of expect that kind of story from any fantasy or sci-fi adventure story these days. A lot of the most iconic franchises have a core villain that you're dealing with for most of the story. Lord of the Rings has Sauron, the Harry Potter franchise has Voldemort, the MCU has Thanos, James Bond has Blofeld, Star Wars has Darth Vader and the Emperor, video games have Bowser? Ganondorf? I actually don't know how well either of those fit into this format. I'm not that familiar with most video game franchises, but I do know the rival from Pokemon Red Blue, and that is actually a really good example of exactly this same kind of story. You fight your rival at really early levels, you clash with him a few times throughout the game, and then he's the final guy you fight at the end of the game. That's basically how most of these hardcover adventures are structured as well. There's a bad guy working behind the scenes, you find out about them early on, but you can't really do anything about them yet. You have to go level up, accomplish other tasks, foil their evil plans in other ways, and then finally you get to have your big, epic, satisfying confrontation with them at the end of the story. And you know what? I am someday going to talk more about this format, where there really is only one main villain throughout the entire campaign. But here's the problem with that format. Most of the time, what actually happens is that you set up this epic confrontation with a villain that you want the players to defeat when they hit level 10 or 15 or 20 or whatever, and then the campaign falls apart. Scheduling gets too difficult, the players never get past level 7, the bad guy is never defeated, the story does not resolve. And because of that, the players feel like this campaign was ultimately kind of unsatisfying, and they might not be terribly eager to play again the next time you invite them. That's why in so many of my videos throughout this year, I'm really trying to encourage you to run a more episodic campaign, to try to solve that exact problem. Now, lots of people already run their games that way. If you run your games closer to the old school approach, where your adventures are inspired more by Conan the Barbarian, you're already used to the idea that each adventure stands alone. But for a lot of us who really want our games to feel more like narrative fiction, we can often get tempted to structure our entire campaigns around a single sinister villain. And there are plenty of episodic franchises that have a core villain across the entire story. Characters like Venger, Mum-Ra, Skeletor, and Dr. Claw. Even the Fire Lord was basically the core villain of Avatar: The Last Airbender, and the story was almost literally about the main characters leveling up until they were strong enough to fight him. And like I said, we will talk about this format another day. We'll talk about structuring the whole campaign around one big bad evil guy. But I actually want to encourage you to take another approach to the villains of your campaign, because you can run an episodic campaign, like I've been encouraging this year, and still have a central big bad. But it's going to be a lot easier, and I would argue more rewarding, if you imagine them instead of the major big bad of your entire campaign, instead think of them more like the big bad of that season of adventures, and not the entire campaign-long story. If you break your campaign down into individual seasons, where a season might take up just a portion of the campaign, maybe as few as 3 levels or as many as 7 or 8, then with that format, you don't have to worry about planning ahead and trying to figure out how you're going to maintain the tension of having one central villain throughout 20 levels of content. You just have to focus on a shorter span of time. You can imagine that a season might last for 5 levels, or it'll be completed once they go through these 6 specific dungeons, or after 1 full calendar year in real life, whatever makes the most sense for you to divide up your campaign into smaller chunks. For example, I tend to imagine my campaigns in 4 seasons to line up with the 4 tiers of play. So Season 1 takes the party from levels 1 to 5, then Season 2 goes from level 6 to 10, and so on. That's usually what I aim for. But back in college, I played in a lot of games where we said, okay, we're going to run a game for 13 weeks because that's how long the semester is, and we'll make sure we have our epic finale right before finals. So our seasons were 13 sessions long. In my current in-person game, there are basically 4 main dungeons that are the center point for the next season. The party's exploring these dungeons to find these 3 magic shields, and they're going to use them to open a vault in the 4th dungeon. So however long it takes for all that to happen, that is going to be a season. So based on your own needs and the story you want to tell, you can figure out how long a season might be, whether that's measured in levels achieved, or dungeons/story milestones, or just a rough number of sessions, or an amount of real-world time, like a year. And then within that season, you can still have a core villain, just like you might get on a TV show. In our Shield Quest storyline, there's a faction trying to collect the shields as well, and they've already sent at least one agent to try to get the first shield from the party. And as this quest continues, the party's going to keep dealing with other members of this evil faction who are trying to get the shields from them, and eventually, they'll have to deal with the leaders of that faction, because they are the big bads of the Shield Quest season. Now, when you have a big bad on a TV show, that doesn't mean that every episode is about them. Just like not every adventure in your D&D campaign has to be about fighting that one villain. It just means that you start setting them up in one of the earlier adventures of your season, and by the end of your season, after those 5 levels or 4 dungeons or 1 year's worth of sessions or whatever your metric is, your players have their epic fight with the current big bad. And then you can move on to your next season and start setting up another season-long story focused on the evil machinations of a new big bad. And we'll talk more about how to run a big bad in other videos throughout the year. But today we're just going to talk about why you should have a big bad. I'm going to try to go through all the ways I think your campaign can be improved by not just having a single big bad across the entire campaign, but also not just having a bunch of minor villains who get defeated after 1 or 2 adventures, but how your campaign can be so much more fun if we model the format of a season-long big bad from TV, like the kind we might see on Buffy the Vampire Slayer or something like that. Hold on 1 second.
Yes?
So, if we're going to talk about villains from TV shows, you're going to need to talk about spoilers, yes?
Yeah, with some of these that's going to be unavoidable.
Well, that's why I'm here. I'm the Spoiler Siren. I love to spoil things.
You love to spoil things?
It's my favorite. I love watching people react when they hear things they didn't want to hear. For example, you haven't finished Stranger Things? Well, I can tell you exactly how the show ends. See, we find out in the final season that Vecna...
Why don't we not... Actually, maybe you can help me, but let's just focus on the TV shows I'm going to talk about as part of this video. There are a few TV shows I'm going to talk about today, and I have to get into major details of them. Maybe you can just focus on spoiling those, okay?
That sounds fun. In the Justice League Unlimited Season 2 finale, Epilogue, we find out that the new Batman, Terry McGinnis, is actually...
Oh, hang on. That's not what I meant.
What? Justice League is one of the shows you're going to talk about today, so I'm going to spoil that show.
Okay, maybe we stay focused on the villains since that's more relevant to the video. In fact, maybe you can spoil for the audience which TV shows and comics we're going to talk about today, so that way they know what spoilers they might run into.
I don't do spoiler warnings.
No, it's not a spoiler warning. You're actually spoiling this video for people.
Alright. This video includes spoilers for Buffy the Vampire Slayer, The Legend of Vox Machina, Ben 10, Teen Titans, Justice League Unlimited, Young Justice, Supernatural, The Vampire Diaries, Teen Wolf, The Walking Dead comics, and The Legend of Korra. That really sounded like a spoiler warning.
Nope, it was definitely a spoiler for this video. You definitely ruined this video for people.
Oh, good. That's my favorite part.
I guess I'll just leave this door open and she'll chime in with a few other spoilers throughout the video. But like I said, today we're talking about why you should use a series of seasonal big bads in your campaign. And the first reason is that having a central big bad for just 1 or 2 seasons gives the players some very clear goals and a sense of closure once they achieve them. In the first episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, we are introduced to the Master, a powerful vampire who is trapped underground, but he has all these other vampire minions working for him, trying to perform rituals that will release him. Every couple of episodes, the Master will either send a vampire minion or 2 to go kill Buffy, or they'll try to perform some ritual that will help free the Master. But you can't keep that storyline going for 7 seasons. You just can't. But that is exactly enough story to support a season of television. Likewise, that's a story that could get stale pretty quickly if it's the plot of an entire D&D campaign, unless you add a lot more complexity and intrigue. But it would be perfect for 1 season of a D&D campaign. In Buffy Season 1, sometimes the vampires do succeed at whatever mission the Master sent them on, and sometimes they fail. But sometimes Buffy also kills a major named lieutenant, and that feels like she's genuinely making progress in defeating him by thinning his forces. So you essentially have this war playing out between the good guy and the bad guy, interwoven between these other episodic adventures. And so every time a vampire shows up in Season 1, you know they're ultimately trying to bring the Master back, and you're trying to figure out what their new plan is and how to stop it. When the bad guys have a very clear goal, you as the Game Master can use that goal to figure out what the bad guys would do next. What is their next path to trying to accomplish that goal, and then use that to generate new adventures. And this means the players have a very clear objective. Stop the bad guys' new plan, and ideally, get rid of as many of their minions as possible so they can't try again. Throughout Buffy Season 1, every few episodes, the bad guys quote a new ancient prophecy that claims to predict when the Master is going to be free and how he's going to do it.
And like a plague of boils, the race of man covered the earth. But on the third day of the newest light will come the harvest, and the blood of men will flow as wine, when the Master will walk among them once more, and hell itself will come to town.
And because these are prophecies that were written down a long time ago, Giles the librarian can also have access to them in his old tomes as well, which means you have a story engine, a new way to keep putting these quests in front of the players. Oh, one of the Master's minions mentioned the harvest? Okay, let me look that up in my books, and then you can figure out what they're doing and how to stop it. Oh, a new episode, Buffy, I was studying my book of prophecies, and tonight is the night the vampires are going to try to summon a secret weapon known as the Anointed One. You have to go stop them. Oh, final episode of the season, all these evil omens are happening across the world, and when I consult my books, these omens all mean the same thing. It's the season finale, the vampires are about to go free the Master, go fight some more of them. Now, prophecies are very tricky to pull off in D&D, but this kind of prophecy is extremely straightforward. Because you can make your big bad obsessed with prophecies and then give your players or an NPC mentor access to those same prophecies, and now they're just a story engine for every new adventure involving that big bad. They're basically exactly the same thing as a tape that says, your mission, should you choose to accept it, ... They're the mission briefing. We'll talk more about various tricks for deploying a big bad storyline in a future video, but the point is, the prophecies in Season 1 are just the way that the heroes learn about each new adventure. Each new prophecy offers just enough details for the players to figure out what the bad guys are going to do next, but they have enough mystery to them that there are still surprises that the players can discover throughout the adventure.
If you think about it, prophecies are basically just spoilers that the characters in a story also get to hear.
Sure, I guess. Anyway, the point is, having a clear big bad gives the players very straightforward objectives with each new quest that you can tie into that villain. But also, only having a big bad around for a single season gives the players closure and catharsis. Once they've defeated that villain, they feel like they've accomplished a major victory, like a story has been concluded. Obviously, they know there's going to be another adventure in the future, but right now they can celebrate the fact that they defeated their first major villain.
We save the world. I say we party.
As I've discussed before, Matt Colville is a major proponent of running modules as distinct adventures that you can then link together into a larger campaign. And he'll frequently think about his campaigns as a series of books, where each one builds up to a major climactic resolution. For example, early in the campaign, they might cross paths with a necromancer named Calorel the Vile, and then by the time they reach level 5, they will have to fight him and defeat him. Or throughout the early levels, they'll be hearing about a curse in a faraway town, and by the time they reach there, they'll be high enough level to battle through that dungeon and fight Explicisica Defilis. It's the exact same format we're talking about today. He'll introduce clues about a big bad early in the campaign, and then once the players get to around level 5, that's when they'll have their confrontation with this villain. That is the end of Book 1. And then Matt will introduce another adventure using a longer module designed to take the players from around level 6 to level 10, something like Red Hand of Doom or The Night Below. And each of those adventures has their own clear villain or evil faction, and so they become the primary antagonist for the next chunk of adventures. Again, he usually describes these segments of his campaign as Book 1 or Book 2, which makes perfect sense. He's literally a fantasy author. But I'm a really big fan of TV, and specifically TV shows with season-long villains who do not tend to come back in the next season. And so I honestly think that's a much better fit for describing this format in a way that we can really easily apply to our own games. Now, just because the players fight and defeat a villain in one season doesn't mean you can't ever tell a story with them ever again. Season 1 of Ben 10 is structured around the villain Vilgax, an alien conqueror who wants to steal the watch from Ben, but he himself is still healing from an intergalactic war, so he can't come down and do it himself until the finale. He has to send a series of minions until he's strong enough to go do it himself. After his defeat at the end of Season 1, Vilgax has still come back dozens of times across that first series. And he's come back so many more times across the entire franchise. He's a major recurring antagonist. But only the first season was focused on him as the primary big bad, setting him up throughout the season, having his agents and minions pop up every few episodes to try to steal the Omnitrix, and foreshadow his eventual arrival and resolving that with an epic final fight. That season also had a subplot where we kept hearing vague references to Grandpa Max's secrets, and As it turns out, those secrets were linked to the events of the finale, so we got a major resolution to that storyline at the same time as we finally got our epic battle with Vilgax. Once again, the story didn't end there, but that season was still a very clear, distinct story. And so even though Vilgax would come back again in later seasons, each season had their own major antagonist as well, like Kevin Levin in Season 2, Ghost Freak in Season 3, and the Forever King in Season 4. Because the writers of that show understood that if you swap out big bads every season, then even if a villain is not defeated forever, you could still give your season finale a lot more impact by framing it as the culmination of a season-long story, and the climax of every storyline you've built up throughout the season. You could also give each season its own clear tone and theme in the form of different monsters that tie into the big bad of that season. For example, I just mentioned that Ghost Freak is the main villain of Season 3 of Ben 10, and throughout that season you have multiple aliens that look more like classic Universal movie monsters, like a mummy and a wolfman and a Frankenstein, and they all play a major role in Ghost Freak's evil plan at the end of the season, because using this specific villain gave the writers an excuse to deploy monsters that were thematically tied into that new big bad. This is the second major benefit of having multiple season-long big bads. It allows you to use a wider variety of monsters as part of the main storyline. For example, in Season 2 of Buffy, the new big bad is Spike. He's another vampire, but he's much less focused on rituals and prophecies. In fact, in his first appearance, there's another prophecy about a special ritual coming later that week, and all the bad guys and all the good guys assume that that's when Buffy is going to fight the vampires next. But Spike jumps the gun and attacks Buffy early.
What can I say? Good Mike.
That is a major signal to the characters, to the audience, to the players in our D&D example, that the last big bad was obsessed with prophecies, but the new one doesn't care about them at all. And we also have this new big bad actually showing up in the streets himself, willing to do his own dirty work, and ready to run away if it looks like he's going to lose the fight. That's another thing that's very tricky to pull off in D&D. We'll come back to that for a future video, but the point is, his introduction makes it very clear that even though we have another vampire big bad, this villain could not be more different than the last one. We learn that he's only here in town so his vampire girlfriend Drusilla can use the energy of the local area to heal. And so Spike's only objective is to keep his girlfriend safe, which means his only goal is to kill the Slayer. That's how he's going to keep her safe. And because Spike doesn't care about rituals or prophecies or normal vampire protocol, he's far more willing to work with other kinds of monsters to accomplish his goals. Partway through the season, he hires a guild of assassins and bounty hunters to go after Buffy and her friends. And these aren't vampires, they're demons, and specially trained mortals and other monsters. Having this new big bad means the heroes have to fight brand new kinds of monsters throughout the season. Well, throughout the first half of the season. Spike is only the big bad for the first 13 episodes. We'll come back to that later in the video. But we see the same thing in the first 2 seasons of Young Justice. Depending on who the villain is, really tells you who you're going to be fighting in every episode. That might be true for the 3rd and 4th seasons as well, but I've only seen the first half of the show. But each of those 2 seasons has a different villainous faction working behind the scenes and masterminding all the different evil plots throughout the season. And depending on the faction, the heroes have to fight different kinds of monsters in every episode. And even though every episode is not tied into the main plot, they don't all have to be tied into the big bad, but every time we deal with an agent of the big bad, it can be different kinds of monsters depending on who that big bad is. In Season 1 of Young Justice, the antagonists are a mysterious collection of supervillains who call themselves the Light, and they're behind a lot of other supervillain schemes we see throughout the season, which means all these other lower-level supervillains are working for the Light. So when the team crosses paths with antagonists like the League of Shadows, or Cobra, or Black Manta, or Sportsmaster, or Mr. Twister, those bad guys are actually doing the bidding of some of the more notorious supervillains of the DC universe, working secretly behind the scenes. And of course, this also gives the writers an opportunity to fill each individual episode with more obscure villains who haven't been the focus on a lot of adaptations, while still saving these more iconic villains for later in the season and giving them the proper build-up they deserve. Which is exactly the same problem we're trying to solve in our own games, making sure that some of these more iconic villains, or these more dangerous, intelligent monsters from the Monster Manual, are given the appropriate amount of build-up so the players understand how significant and dangerous these bad guys truly are. But in Season 2, the primary antagonists were the Reach, an alien race trying to covertly conquer the Earth. So as a result, you have the heroes dealing with a lot more alien villains, like Lobo, Despero, and Black Beetle. Some of them directly work for or with the Reach, while others are just drawn to the Earth because it's currently the site of a lot of other alien activity. But even though there are still other supervillains at large, the Light is still active, there's other stuff going on, the primary theme of that season is this alien invasion. So there were a lot more alien antagonists. New season, new big bad, a whole new toy chest full of different monsters to play with. Legend of Vox Machina might be the perfect example of this concept in action. In Season 1, Lord and Lady Briarwood are a vampire and a necromancer, respectively, and so a lot of the monsters we see throughout the season are various forms of undead. In Seasons 2 and 3, the big bad is a cabal of dragons known as the Chroma Conclave. And in order to stop them, you have to kill the 2 big dragons in charge, but first you have to fight 2 other dragon enforcers, and their henchmen, these opportunists who think they can get what they want if they serve the dragons. With each new big bad comes new henchmen and minions and lieutenants. And as a game master, this gives you an enormous opportunity to use a lot more monsters from the monster manual. If you have one big bad for your entire campaign, somebody like Strahd von Zarovich, then most of the agents of that big bad are going to be minions that match what you think makes sense for that character, whether it be a whole lot of other vampires or other kinds of undead, or maybe even a devil bound to his service because you still think that kind of works thematically for the character. But even if you wind up adding a whole lot of original material to your Curse of Strahd campaign, it's unlikely that you're going to add certain kinds of monsters to Strahd's court. Like, you might introduce a Frankenstein monster or a werewolf, but you're probably not going to add a Mind Flayer or a Yuan-Ti or a Kuo-Toa, although I do have to admit that if one of Strahd's henchmen was a goofy little fish dude, that would be incredible. But maybe not on brand. Maybe that would be a little silly. And we'll talk about that in a future video as well. But really, there are lots of other interesting monsters in the game that just aren't that thematically relevant to a villain like Strahd. Not just because of the kind of creature he is, but also because of his personality and his specific goals. But if you have multiple big bads, then each one can bring with them their own style of recruiting henchmen and lieutenants, giving you the opportunity to play with a lot more variety of monsters. And unlike in the first 2 seasons of Buffy, where the big bads themselves were both vampires, your big bads can be very different kinds of monsters, giving you much more of a chance to use creatures from the monster manual and give them their due. Run a whole Mind Flayer season with the Elder Brain as the big bad. Imagine a campaign where the Yuan-Ti are the main villains. Either they're the minions of a larger threat, or they are the big bads themselves. Both could be interesting. And if you have an idea for a big bad where the Kuo-Toa are the minions, or maybe even they're the major villains themselves, please let me know in the comments, because that sounds so unhinged and I have to know how it would work, and just generally, you seem like you would be cool. So hit me up in the comments, let me know your Kuo-Toa villain season. Although that would probably have to be your first season, right? Kuo-Toa are pretty weak, that's part of what makes them so fun, and even Yuan-Ti won't pose that much of a threat once you get to level like 10 at the latest. Even in much higher numbers, they don't pose that much of a danger. But for a Mind Flayer season, that could be season 2 or 3, and maybe even 4. Depends how many seasons you have and how far apart they are and how much you break them up. But the point is, you kind of can't deploy Mind Flayers too early, or you're going to kill your players too easily. But this actually brings me to my next big selling point for using several season-long big bads. Each new villain can represent a different tier of play. In Vox Machina, you can't do the Dragon Invasion storyline when the players are too low level. It's something you have to build up to. And thankfully, in a game like Dungeons & Dragons, your characters actually do level up over time. So once the players hit the right level for you to introduce the villains as a credible threat without killing your characters instantly, you can structure a whole season around them. There are plenty of monsters in the Monster Manual that would make perfect big bads, but just don't present enough of a threat to be the villain for an entire campaign. Think about something like the Aboleth. It's an ancient primordial sea creature older than the gods themselves. It resents the gods for essentially stealing its worshippers, and wants to literally destroy all religion in the material plane. And it's only challenge rating 10. It's weaker than any of the campaign-long big bads I talked about at the beginning of the video, like Vecna or Tiamat. It's even weaker than Strahd, and most dungeon masters seem to agree that Strahd is not hitting at the weight class he needs to for how dangerous he's supposed to be in the story. However, if you make a monster like this the villain for one season, then you can give that monster its due, make them the big evil threat they're supposed to be, and then the next big bad for the next season can be a much nastier monster. In Buffy seasons 1 and 2, the villain is always just a vampire hiding somewhere in the city. The big bad of season 3 was the mayor, who actually had institutional power that the previous big bads could only dream of. And he was also, a human being, so he could walk around in the daylight. But he also has lots of other demon allies. He makes deals with all the monsters in the city, so basically any kind of creature could pop up as one of his agents. And he's also essentially what we as D&D players would consider to be a warlock. He's performed dark rituals to give himself magic powers. He's not a spellcaster, but he's immortal, and partway through the season he becomes literally unkillable. And in that final fight, he transforms into a huge monster, which, yes, can be killed, but it's the kind of thing we'd never seen before on the show. He literally attacks the main characters at graduation. It's really hard to find more of a literal way to say, we are about to move on to the next tier of play. Now, a lot of Buffy villains want to conquer or destroy the world, so we don't usually have the same escalation of stakes you would normally get when you scale up your villains throughout a franchise. But that's a specific issue with Buffy, that most evil plans don't really build on each other. The world is almost always in danger at the end of the season. But so many other franchises do have seasonal big bads with progressively bigger and badder plans than the last. Lex Luthor wants to kill Superman and rule Metropolis. Brainiac wants to take over the world and harvest its data, or open a portal for a larger villain like Zod. Zod wants to conquer the Earth and start a new Kryptonian empire. And Darkseid, the biggest bad guy in the entire DC canon, the greatest villain to ever be introduced in an issue of Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen, wants to eliminate free will and enslave the entire universe. Now, as game masters, we don't face that same problem as comic book writers or television showrunners. They usually have no idea how long their story is going to run because a TV show could get canceled after 2 seasons or keep running for 10. These days, that latter is a lot less likely. Comic book writers have no control over how long they'll stay on a title, or, well, some control, hopefully, but even then, they don't know who's going to write the character next and what they're going to do with that character. We don't have those same problems in our games. Sure, our games can get canceled early if the game falls apart, but if that doesn't happen, we know that there is a built-in endpoint for our campaign. Eventually, if you play for long enough, the characters will hit level 20, and they can't progress any further. You can still tell some adventures with your 20th level characters, but that does start to feel like the best time to start wrapping up your story and preparing for a new campaign. And the monsters we use in this game each come with challenge ratings to let us know approximately when in the campaign we should use them. The challenge rating system is certainly not perfect, but at least it tells you that you shouldn't fight the devil when you're only level 5. It's not going to go well, so you have to work up to that. But on Supernatural, they fought the devil in Season 5. That was the big bad of that season. Which is fine if you're only doing 5 seasons. Like, you could break a 20-level campaign into 5 seasons and end your campaign with fighting the devil. That would be a truly incredible campaign. But if you fight the devil in Season 5 and then you get picked up for another season, where do you go from there? Hell, what happens if you get picked up for a total of 15 seasons? What other threats can you even throw at your heroes after they've already fought the devil?
Spoiler, in the final season of Supernatural, they have to fight God.
Okay, sure, I guess I understand how you get to that point, but thank God they didn't get picked up again, or else really, literally, where else could you go? Thankfully, that's just not really a problem you have to worry about with D&D. You don't have to worry about blowing your wad too early and having nowhere to go, because the game kind of helps you make sure each new villain is, by definition, going to be more powerful than the last one. Now, unfortunately, when the writers of Buffy gave almost every villain the same evil plot, conquer or destroy the world, it meant they had to find other ways of making their big bads feel distinct from each other. Fortunately, that's something they were also incredibly good at doing.
I swear, I would sell my soul for a decent short game. Of course, it's a little late for that. I don't suppose I could offer your soul, huh? Really help me on the green. I'm just funning.
Because in most franchises outside of D&D, it's actually much harder to explain how your heroes are able to fight more and more dangerous villains every year. Most TV shows don't come with a clear challenge rating system, which means they had to learn some other tricks to help make sure each new villain didn't feel like they were repeating themselves. So they made each new big bad feel very distinct, very unique from the other enemies the heroes have faced. And that's the next big benefit of having a new big bad every season. It gives you the opportunity to play lots of different types of villains. If you look at the first 4 seasons of Buffy, you have the Master, basically your classic, campy, horror movie monster. Then you have Spike, a much more clever and unpredictable foe. Then he gets replaced halfway through the season, and... Okay, major spoilers here for Buffy Season 2. Seriously, if you're ever gonna go watch this show, which you should do, go do so before watching this part of the video. Okay, I warned you. Okay, take it away.
Spoiler, Buffy's vampire boyfriend Angel loses his soul and turns evil.
Yeah, in the second half of the season, Angel, one of our heroes, is the new big bad. He becomes Angelus, a sadistic psychopath. And once again, he's a totally different kind of villain than anyone we've gotten so far. He knows Buffy and her friends extremely well, he knows all of Buffy's weak points, and he doesn't really have any goal aside from just tormenting Buffy. In fact, Spike is getting frustrated that Angelus is just toying with the Slayer rather than outright killing her.
I'm still trying to decide the best way to send my regards.
Why don't you rip her lungs out? It might make an impression.
Wax poetry.
Doesn't have to. What rhymes with lungs?
And unlike Spike or the Master, Angelus doesn't keep sending minions out there to fight Buffy. He just keeps popping up in different episodes, finding new and creative ways to torment the heroes. Then in Season 3, the Mayor is the opposite. He's polite and friendly and family-friendly and germophobic. He's so banal in his evil because he's almost never openly sinister. He doesn't have to be. Then in Season 4, the antagonists are the Initiative, an arm of the government that is studying demons, referring to them as hostiles. So you have actual authority figures working for the US government. And the leaders of the Initiative are extremely dismissive of Buffy and her friends. And the primary face of the Initiative, Professor Walsh, is also studying the demons that they capture so she can conduct her own experiments.
Spoiler, Professor Walsh is building a Frankenstein monster out of dead soldiers and demons, and when the monster wakes up, he kills her and becomes the new big bad.
Yeah, once again, about halfway through the season, we switch big bads, and our new enemy is Adam, a human demon Frankenstein. And here's the thing. Adam would actually be a fantastic villain for a D&D campaign. He's just not a very compelling one for a TV show. But there's a lot of meat on the bone, pardon the pun. He's a creepy Frankenstein monster, and just like the literary monster he's inspired by, in Adam's first full episode, he kills a child. But unlike in the novel Frankenstein, where the monster, I'll call him the monster because I know people prefer that, but my compromise is that I'm not going to call the doctor Dr. Frankenstein, because I don't think he actually is a doctor. So we'll say the monster and Victor Frankenstein, even though you know who I mean when I would say Frankenstein and the doctor. But fine, I will humor the pedants out there. But in the book, Frankenstein, the monster kills a child out of revenge against Victor Frankenstein. And in the Boris Karloff movie, the monster kills a child because he doesn't know his own strength. But on Buffy, Adam kills a child because he's performing an experiment. He's trying to learn more about life and about death and about his own role in the world. He basically kills a kid for the same reason that the first soldier dies in the first Predator movie. And in a similar fashion, he is dissected. That's incredibly, genuinely chilling. But the problem with Adam is, well, first of all, he's not as interesting or charismatic as any of the other villains, but that's honestly not the end of the world. You could overcome that. The real problem is that he's created to be a parallel for one of the main characters, giving them their own dedicated antagonist. But the character he's meant to parallel is Buffy's new boyfriend, Riley, and unfortunately, nobody cares about Riley. Adam killed Professor Walsh, who he views as the mother to both himself and Riley, but once again, it's kind of a forced parallel, and also we don't care enough about Riley for this to hit as hard as it could have. In the final episodes of the season, Adam even gets Riley on his side, kind of, but he doesn't make a compelling, persuasive argument. He uses, like, mind control or something. In every way, the personal connection between the villain and the heroes is just not as strong as the writers were hoping it would be. There are other problems with Adam as well. I'm sure we could talk about those a lot more another day, but Adam absolutely could have worked. Because you can have different big bads represent the perfect villain for different members of the party. We saw that with the Vox Machina campaign. The Briarwoods killed Percy's family, Thordak killed the twins' mother, Raishon killed Keyleth's sister tribe. They were antagonists that had a clearly defined link to one of the player characters. But the show that was maybe the best at this was Teen Titans. Every season had a big bad who had a clear connection with a different member of the group. Slade was the villain of seasons 1 and 2, but in season 1 he was very much presented as Robin's arch enemy. Whereas in season 2, the story was much more about Tara and Beast Boy. Slade recruited Tara, who was Beast Boy's best friend and maybe love interest, definitely on Beast Boy's side. He cared about her very deeply. And Slade recruited her to join his side. Just like how Adam recruited Riley, who was also the love interest to Buffy. But Slade doesn't use mind control or even blackmail. He convinces Tara. And also, I don't say this to be mean, but we care about Tara a whole lot more than we care about Riley. And so even though most future appearances of Slade once again depict him as a rival of Robin's when he shows up in future seasons, in season 2 his evil plans target Tara and Beast Boy the hardest, because they're the ones who are the center of that storyline. The rest of the cast gets some great stuff to do throughout the season, but Beast Boy is the one who gets a one-on-one duel with Slade. He's the one who gets the most focus put on him in the aftermath of Tara's betrayal, and he's the one who decides whether or not they're going to try to redeem her. It's not as focused on him as season 1 was focused on Robin. There really is still Tara's story as well, because she's just a more interesting character than Riley was. But Beast Boy is our link to Tara. We only care about her because he cares about her. And so that season is really devastating to Beast Boy. In Teen Titans Season 3, the new big bad is Brother Blood, and the season does a really good job of making him a perfect antagonist for Cyborg. Season 4 is all about Raven dealing with her evil demon father, Trigon, although Slade does come back as his lieutenant, so it's nice to see him again, and we'll talk more about how they brought him back another day, because I have so much to say about that, but I'm going to cut it from this video and talk about it some more some other time. But Season 5 is also a Beast Boy season, as the Titans fight the Brotherhood of Evil, who are the main antagonists of Beast Boy's former team, the Doom Patrol. And throughout this battle with the Brotherhood, Beast Boy has to rise to the challenge and grow up a little bit. Starfire doesn't get her own season-long antagonist, but everyone else has their own dedicated villain. And because these villains are designed to challenge very different characters, they have very different approaches to villainy, based on what's going to be the most effective way to tell that story. But you don't even need to go that extreme with it. Sure, it's always nice when every new villain can feel like a personal threat towards one or more party members, but even without that conceit, using a series of different big bads allows you to just play a lot of different villains with very different personalities and different approaches to evil. And a really good example of that is The Walking Dead. In both the comic and the show, there was always a very clear formula to those stories. We find a new group of survivors, and sometimes they seem kind of scary, but other times they might seem pretty cool. Maybe this is going to be a nice place to live. And then you find out, inevitably, oops, they're extremely evil. And every time you think, well, okay, that's the most evil a human being can be, which means the writers have to find a new way to top themselves next time. And throughout both versions of the story, you wind up meeting this series of horrible human beings, each one some of the most vile pieces of crap anyone could ever imagine, and yet somehow not the worst person you're going to meet in that franchise, because there's always someone worse waiting around the corner. I'll admit, I only watched the first few seasons of The Walking Dead. I spent 3 or 4 seasons with these hopes of what the show was going to be and what it could be, and eventually I just had to accept the fact that they weren't making the show I wanted to make. They weren't interested in making the show that I wanted to watch. I was trying to order a milkshake at a hardware store, so it was time for me to dip out. But based on what I remember watching and the clips I've seen from later seasons, there was a whole catalog of villains that you could pillage for your own games. Even if you just steal one or two villains and reskin them as an orc or a Githyanki or a mummy lord or whatever, you could create villains that your players would remember forever. And the same goes for the comics. I read the comic for a good long while, but eventually I stopped reading that comic as well because it just got to be too depressing. It was this ongoing, never-ending slog. It felt like there was never any reprieve. There was no escape from the constant misery. But the reason I felt that way is because you can find some of the most evil villains of all time within those pages, which is helpful for us in our purposes today. I remember seeing the Governor popping up on lists of the best comic book villains of all time, and this was long before Negan was introduced. This had always been a really good comic for finding bad guys. Honestly, over the past few months, I've been slowly dipping my toes back into the world of comics again for the first time in like a decade. And now that the Walking Dead comics have ended, part of me does want to go back to that series and see what sorts of villains I could steal for my own games. Plus, I would have to imagine that the feeling of constant misery has to be partially abated by the fact that now there is a final issue. There's a finite amount of story. You know how much is left. You know the misery won't go on forever because there is an ending. And from what I've heard, people seem to like the ending.
Spoiler, the final issue of the comic book is a courtroom drama.
Okay, that sounds extremely weird, but at least I'm curious to find out how we got from We Are the Walking Dead to You Can't Handle the Truth. And speaking of learning new things, perfect segue, but that's another fantastic thing you can do with seasonal big bads. You can use each one to enrich the lore of your world. For example, in Season 5 of Buffy, the big bad is Glory, a powerful monster who physically takes the form of a beautiful, glamorous woman who is even stronger than Buffy is. At first, we assume she's just another very powerful demon, but eventually we discover she's a god. She ruled an entire hell dimension before being banished to Earth. Throughout that storyline, we meet several new ancient secret societies, and we learn about a mystical connection between Glory and one of the members of Buffy's family. I don't know why I'm being coy about spoilers in this video of all videos, but I guess I have to at least pretend some of you are going to go check out this series after watching this video, and I'm trying to preserve at least some mystery out there. But this shows us something cool you can do with your big bads. You can use each new enemy to reveal more and more lore about your world. I watched the first 4 seasons of The Vampire Diaries. Technically speaking, I watched more of that show than I ever watched of The Walking Dead. Make of that what you will. And on The Vampire Diaries, there was a trend for a while where each new big bad was an older vampire than the last one. We were working our way through the villains, whose origins went further and further back in time. Essentially allowed the characters and the audience to dig down through the supernatural strata of the world and learn more about where these monsters came from. Now, the big bads on Vampire Diaries didn't really exactly line up with just one season, at least in the first couple seasons, but they still had this interesting sort of succession, one after the other. The first big bad was Damon, Stefan's evil older brother, and both of them had been vampires since the Civil War. And it turned out most of what Damon is doing, he's doing because he's still hung up on Catherine, the vampire who turned to Damon and Stefan. And when you know it, Catherine is our next big bad, and throughout her arc, we learn more about how she became a vampire and what she wants, which is to hide from our next major big bad, Klaus, one of the original vampires. And he and his siblings, the originals, are the main threat for a while. But then it turns out that they have their own enemy, their father, Mikhail. With each new villain, we're going further back in time and revealing new threats that we had never seen before. Additionally, the show is also introducing other supernatural creatures like werewolves and witches, and over time you have other things like doppelgangers, although don't get your hopes up, they're not nearly as cool as the ones in D&D. But this means when you've gone pretty much as far back through the vampire family line as you possibly can, you have these other threads of the mythology that you can follow for a while instead. You can learn more things about the family of werewolves or witches or the monster hunters or whatever. And so when they want to take a break from having a vampire big bad, one of these other monsters could be the villain for a while. That could be our new big bad. Now, around the same time that Vampire Diaries was on the air, there was also Teen Wolf on MTV, and I have to admit, I never watched that show. But my friend Jeffrey did, and so I asked him if that show ever used their season-long big bads to deepen the lore and introduce new monsters into the mythology. And his answer was, yes, oh my god, yes, they did that all the time. It was the main thing they did. Also, please tell me you're going to put this in the video. Please, I can't have watched Teen Wolf for nothing. Please put my knowledge to use somehow. So, there you go, Jeffrey. Your knowledge has been included in the video. That is a thing that Teen Wolf did. And this is something that is so easy to do with D&D because so many different monsters come with their own interesting lore. And with some monsters, you have to figure out important aspects of their lore, or you're just not going to be able to defeat them. If you don't do your research into a vampire or a mummy or a lich, then when you think you've slayed one of them for good, but you haven't taken care of their contingency plans, you're going to be in for a very rude surprise. Only by diving into their mythology can you have any hope of destroying them fully. And usually that means learning more about not just this type of monster, but this specific villain and figuring out how they think and where they would hide their secret weaknesses. and that's just one of the many ways you can also tie your big bads into the history of your world. For example, on Buffy, we learn that the mayor of Sunnydale has been the same guy ever since the town was founded. Spike has killed 2 Slayers in less than 200 years, and towards the end of the series, we learn a lot more about those Slayers and those murders. The Master was defeated in the end of Season 1, but even after his defeat, we later learn how other antagonists were connected to him as well. And I know some GMs always struggle to make their players care about their wider mythology and history of their world, but if you can make it essential for them to learn more about this lore in order to defeat this season's enemy, then with every new villain in every new season, you can basically trick your players into learning a whole lot more about your campaign setting.
Spoiler, he's about to transition to an ad for World Anvil.
Hey, yeah, yes, but come on, the transitions are the best part. Anyway, she's right, this video is sponsored by World Anvil, which is a fantastic online resource that you can use to create wiki-style articles for any aspect of your world. You can make articles about monsters, villains, NPCs, magic items, gods, nations, dungeons, and so much more. And so when you're creating all these different evil villains with all these different evil plans, you're going to need some way to keep them all straight. And World Anvil is the perfect tool when you need to make a bunch of articles full of lore. You can create articles for the big bads themselves, articles for their minions and lieutenants, articles for the magic items they're hunting down, and articles for the prophecies that you use to deliver exposition to your players and get them hooked on this quest. You can even use the Chronicles feature to create a timeline of the big bad's evil scheme, so you know what's going to happen if the players don't get involved, or if they fail to stop the villain's plans. You can also include lore in each article that's only visible to you, so that way you can still share these articles with your players, and they can read about the lore that has been revealed in the game so far, but you can still hide the information that they haven't uncovered yet. And you can use the auto-linker feature to connect these different articles together, so you don't have to scroll through each page and look for each time you mentioned a new villain and find a way to integrate them into each article manually. You can just ask the website to create a hyperlink the first time the big bad is mentioned in every article, which makes it easier than ever to integrate them directly into each other and demonstrate how they are deeply tied into the history of your world. And if you visit worldanvil.com/supergeekmike and use the promo code SUPERGEEK at checkout, you can save 51% off of any annual membership. That's more than half off. Once again, that's worldanvil.com/supergeekmike and use the promo code SUPERGEEK. Thank you so much to World Anvil for sponsoring this video. The next major benefit we get from rotating big bads is the fact that each new villain can challenge the heroes in new ways. For example, we can take a look at Buffy Season 6, where the villains working behind the scenes are the Trio. Literally just 3 nerdy young men. They have delusions of grandeur, but really they're just incels cosplaying as supervillains. But as the season goes on, they start to cross some serious lines. They start committing true acts of evil, particularly their leader, Warren. And this invites a question that Buffy and her friends have really never had to worry about too much. If a mortal commits an act of evil, of course the Slayer and her friends can and should intervene, but how do you punish them? Can you just take their life like you would with a demon? The show draws a really distinct line in the sand. Vampires and demons don't have souls, and humans do. When you're faced with a far more realistic form of evil, what do you do about that? Now, this has come up a couple of times. It popped up a little bit in Season 2. It was kind of a subplot in Season 5, but it's a much bigger topic of discussion in Season 6, when these 4chan losers are using fancy sci-fi gadgets and magic spells to do very realistic acts of evil that happen in our own world every day that I cannot discuss on YouTube for risk of monetization. But of course, it's an even-numbered season of Buffy, so we switch big bads partway through. This time, it's in the last few episodes of the season, so once again, we are in major Mondo spoiler territory. Take it away.
Spoiler, Warren kills Tara, and Willow becomes the new big bad.
Right. Throughout the entire season, we've seen Willow using magic more and more, becoming way more comfortable doing so. And so when Tara is killed, Willow goes full Dark Phoenix. She embraces dark magic and goes on a revenge mission, and we realize that is the big bad the show has actually been building up all season long. But once again, you can't just punch this villain and kill them. First of all, she's a very powerful witch, so you can't punch her. But also, she's one of Buffy's best friends. You can't punch her. You need to find some other way to solve this problem.
I know you're in pain. I can't imagine the pain you're in. And I know you're about to do something apocalyptically evil and stupid. And hey, you still want to hang. The first day of kindergarten, you cried because you broke the yellow crayon. And you're too afraid to tell anyone. I love crayon breaky Willow, and I love scary veiny Willow. So if I'm going out, it's here. I love you.
But once again, you can take this same trick into your own games, but you don't have to have your villains be so closely tied into the players' lives. There can be lots of reasons the players can't just punch their way to victory. We'll talk more in a minute about the big bad from Buffy Season 7, which was an ancient malevolent force known only as the First Evil. But before we get there, relevant to this topic, the first was literally intangible. It took the form of deceased characters from across the series, and so it could appear anywhere and talk to anyone, and we got these incredible dialogue scenes between our heroes and these beloved characters who had died and were now speaking as the villain. But you literally could not lay a finger on them, which meant the heroes had to find some other way to stop the first's evil schemes. And if you make it so at least one or two of your big bads can't be easily defeated by punching them, then you can create this really excellent challenge for your heroes. You know, comics fans spend a lot of time thinking about who would win in a fight with who, but that's like the most boring question, because most of the best supervillains aren't just the ones who can beat up the heroes the best. They pose a larger, more psychological or existential threat, to the point where just beating up the bad guy might feel really good and satisfying, but it's not going to stop their evil scheme. I first got hooked on comic books through Ultimate Spider-Man back in the early 2000s, and there were 3 primary arch-enemies across that series: Green Goblin, Dr. Octopus, and the Kingpin. Now, Doc Ock was usually the most classically supervillainous of the 3. He would attack people in public, he would clone Spider-Man a bunch of times, standard evil genius stuff. Usually you could just punch him, and most of your problems in that story arc are going to go away. But Green Goblin specifically treated Spider-Man like the son he never had, even though he had a son. He felt this weird kinship with him, and he always wanted Peter to come over to his side. And so he would frequently threaten Spider-Man's loved ones to try to make Peter comply with the Green Goblin's evil plans. You might still try to fight him, but he might throw your girlfriend off a bridge or threaten to kill your aunt unless you help him storm the White House. Once you can figure out how to get them to safety and get them away from the Goblin, that's when you can finally go beast mode and punch his lights out. And even that is not easy to do. He's still very, very strong, but if you even try to do that too early in a story arc, one of your loved ones might literally die. And the Kingpin was just an untouchable criminal mastermind. Sure, you can fight him. It's not easy, but it's doable. He's certainly not as strong as the Green Goblin. But what does punching the Kingpin actually accomplish? The only way to actually hurt him is to go after his empire. And Kingpin has the ability to use his entire empire to just fuck with Spider-Man. In one of the best story arcs, he reveals to Spider-Man that he actually owns Spider-Man's likeness from his original appearances as a wrestler. So every time Spider-Man does something heroic, Fisk can sell more merchandise and make more money off of him. And he deliberately floods the market with Spidey merch, not because it's a good business decision, because it's not. It's made very clear in the story arc that it's going to harm the brand, but that's on purpose. He just wants to torment Spider-Man. Batman villains are often the same way. They pose a larger threat than just being a physical foe. Batman can outpunch almost all his villains, but even if you can get your hands on the Joker and beat the stuffing out of him, that does not stop the countdown for the bombs he's planted across the city.
You have nothing to threaten me with. Nothing to do with all your strength.
That's like the entire point of almost every Batman villain. You can't just punch them and end the whole problem. That's just not how it works. Most of them are designed to challenge Batman on an intellectual level. Riddler's whole thing is that he outthinks Batman. That's his deal. There are a few versions of Joker where he's actually a pretty good fighter, but most of the time, he's a psychological threat, tormenting Batman with elaborate evil schemes. Even Bane is famous for being the strong one. He's treated like he's the Batman equivalent of Doomsday, which creation-wise he kind of was, but at his best, Bane is also smart as hell. He only succeeded in breaking Batman's back because he ran him ragged first. He took Batman's greatest strength, his commitment to the never-ending battle, and used it against him, turned it into a weakness. He unleashed this gauntlet of supervillains that made Bruce work around the clock to stop them, pushing him way past his limits. And only then did Bane finally ambush him and mop the floor with him, because he was literally sleep-deprived. One of the best recent additions to Batman's mythos was the Court of Owls, a powerful secret organization that was introduced... Okay, there's a typo in my teleprompter. There has to be, because it says they were introduced 15 years ago. I called them a recent addition to the Batman mythos, but 15 years ago was like a really long time ago. I was 15 when I really started reading comics. That would be crazy if that's how long ago they were introduced, because that would mean that I'm old, and that can't be right. No. That's not possible. There must be a typo in the teleprompter. Or maybe the Court of Owls has been there the whole time. That's the whole gimmick of the Court of Owls. They're this powerful faction of Gotham's ultra elite that have been using violence and money and blackmail to control the city's politics for generations. Which I know sounds like sort of I'm deliberately doing social commentary, or they were, but I just want to remind you that what's happening in the real world is so cartoonishly evil that we thought it was the master plan of comic book supervillains. That's fun. We live in a fun world. But the thing with the Court of Owls is no matter how many of them you punch in the face, shattering their iconic evil owl masks, that doesn't make the problem go away. You have to figure out some other way to deal with the problem besides just violence.
Spoiler, almost all of these stories still end with an epic fight.
Okay, yeah, sure, because the truth is you still need to give your heroes somebody to punch. That's why so many great villains, even the more cerebral ones, still have iconic henchmen or lieutenants. The Court of Owls have the Talons. They're foot soldiers who were introduced specifically so the Bat family has somebody to punch. Almost every James Bond movie has an intellectual bad guy that Bond has to defeat by defusing his evil war machine or shutting down the missile or whatever. And also, the bad guy has some iconic lieutenant or henchman that Bond has to fight, like Oddjob or Jaws. Even the final Buffy villain, the First Evil, has a whole army of ancient vampires. And the moment Firefly got cancelled, Nathan Fillion showed up as Caleb, the first main henchman, providing somebody for Buffy to punch. Although while we're on the subject of the First Evil, that actually brings me to the final topic I want to discuss today. How a big bad can emerge in response to the player's actions. The first is this primal, ancient evil, supposedly older than the universe itself. And yet, suddenly when we get to the final season of Buffy, it launches its evil plans in overdrive? Why now? That's awfully convenient, right? Well, no, because we actually find out that because in the previous season our heroes brought Buffy back to life, this essentially broke the universe just enough that the First was able to start killing off all the potential Slayers, in an effort to end the Slayer line of succession. Now, you didn't really need that justification, but it's certainly nice to have. It's always nice when you can find a way to explain how a villain spun out of what happened in the last story arc. For example, in the third season of The Legend of Korra, the big bad is Zahir, a terrorist who, hey, look at that, wants to end the Avatar line of succession. That's funny. But he's also an airbender, a power he got thanks to the big magical finale of Season 2. And while Zahir is defeated at the end of Season 3, their final battle leaves Korra too weak to return to duty. And in her absence, a new threat emerges, and we get the villain for Season 4, Kuvira, who takes advantage of the aftermath of Season 3 to launch a fascist regime. Each new villain is responding to, or created by, the events at the end of the previous season. And when you can pull that off, it really makes the world feel even more real. It makes it feel like there are these unintended consequences to how the last adventure ended, which led to a new villain arriving on the scene. But perhaps the ultimate example of the villain emerging as a response to what the players did comes from Justice League Unlimited. For those who aren't familiar, Justice League ran for 2 seasons and had a core cast of 7 heroes. And then we got Justice League Unlimited, which had a core cast of like 50. And throughout the first 2 seasons of JLU, we learned about Project Cadmus, a special government project designed to develop countermeasures against the Justice League.
If the Justice League ever went rogue, what do you think would be the result?
That's moot.
Humor me. In every single scenario, you beat us. Badly. But that was before Cadmus. Now we have the technology to defend ourselves.
Cadmus had a lot of irons in the fire, using cloning to make their own metahumans who were loyal to the government, doing research into dark magic, and making backroom deals with Lex Luthor. But they do all this because they see the League as a very legitimate potential threat.
If you present a threat to the world, the Justice League will take you down.
If we present a threat, you've got a spaceship floating over our heads with a laser weapon pointing down. In another dimension, 7 of you overthrew the government and assassinated the president. We're the good guys, protecting our country from a very real threat. You.
When you hear it like that, it does make some sense. This whole story arc is essentially a response to the fact that the Justice League has gotten so big and powerful, they answer to no one. And Superman has started getting more and more frustrated by seeing his enemies, like Lex Luthor, essentially escape consequence, fooling the world into thinking he's not only a legitimate businessman, but a viable candidate for president. Believe me, Superman, I sympathize completely. But Superman and the Justice League feel so confident that they're doing the right thing, they don't spend a lot of time asking for permission anymore. And throughout the season, we slowly learn about other important characters from the DC universe who have joined Cadmus in an attempt to prepare themselves for the possibility that the Justice League might go full fascist someday. Which again, we have already seen them become. In an alternate universe, it literally happened. It's not a totally unfounded fear. I'm not saying that the Cadmus was right, but I'm saying, yeah, I understand why those villains did what they did. But there's one last way you can tie a new big bad into the events of a previous season. Through a power vacuum. We saw this a little bit with Kuvira in The Legend of Korra. She rose up to take over the Earth Kingdom after Zahir killed the Earth Queen in Season 3. But this can also be done when the heroes take a villain off the board. You can introduce the idea that this villain was actually keeping another worse villain locked away or keeping them in check in some way. And now you've dealt with this one big bad, actually, because you've dealt with this one big bad, you're gonna have to deal with another. And this one might be even worse.
I'm the one who kept order in this city! 1 month! In 1 month you wish you had me back!
Now the world is out of balance. Nobody told you to destroy the demon.
Jade did it.
Now there is a void for a new, stronger evil to fill.
You've created a power vacuum in the criminal universe. And nature abhors a vacuum.
And that's what you've done.
Huh? What is?
You created a power vacuum.
Oh? Okay, when did I do that?
When you banished Odwick.
What?
He was the big bad last year.
Yeah, but he's gone.
And do you remember the last thing he said?
Yeah, he was worried about not getting enough comments on future videos. He wanted me to do some last-minute clickbait.
No, please don't. You need me. You need me and the focus I gave you. You need me so you can stay on one task. Without me, you'll be helpless against...
He tried to warn me about something.
And now I get to be the one who spoils it for you.
So, it's you? You're the new big bad.
Of course not. I'm not here to mess with your channel or your personal life. I just like to watch things get spoiled and see how people react. I told you, prophecies are just spoilers for the characters in the story.
There's a prophecy?
The algorithm wizard gave you a clear path. Make his favorite videos or feel his wrath. With Odwick gone, now you're free to play, but you've become a new villain's prey. And as you experiment more and more, each video is tougher than the one before. Lack of focus leads to loss of hope. Beware the curse of the creeping scope.
The creeping scope? What is that? Is that a person? Another cartoon character? Another version of me? Is it an item like the time travel watch from last year? What's the creeping scope?
You'll find out, but you have far more immediate problems than that.
Like what?
The yogurt in your fridge went bad a week ago.
God damn it, I knew it.
Now that he's gone, I can spoil the topic of the next video. After all, who do you think has been writing these title cards every week?
Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. This is another long one, but I think it's worth it. Really fun going into this topic in more detail. And also, I think I could go into more detail in a lot of different parts of this video. Let me know if there's anything in particular I touched on in this video that you want to see me address in more detail in the future. Also, I am aware that since I wrote this script before I filmed it, Firefly has announced that they're coming back, or they're going to try to come back, which is very funny that I mentioned Firefly getting canceled in the one video, and this happens to be the video that's coming out after that reboot is announced. But it's animated, which actually makes me more excited. No offense to any of those actors, except Adam Baldwin, because fuck him. But I don't really want to watch all of these older actors reprise their roles and pretend that nothing happened to them for 20 years, or that a bunch happened to them for 20 years, but we didn't see any of it. And also just pretend no time has passed and we're just back to the old adventures in the past. But if we're doing it with voiceover work, I'm fine with that. And also, relevant to this video, most of the cast of Firefly played voices in Justice League Unlimited, in the Cadmus arc. Nathan Fillion played Vigilante, the cowboy, very appropriate. Zoe, who's Zoe's actress's name? Why am I blanking on this? Gina Torres played Vixen. Let's see, who else is in Firefly? Adam Baldwin played like a bunch of characters, actually. He's done a lot of voiceover work, so I'm not excited about the guy who named, who came up with the term ethics in gaming journalism being involved in another project, but like, whatever. We'll see how I feel about when I actually am hearing his voice. But I know he can do voiceover work because he did a bunch of it for Justice League Unlimited. Marina Baccarin, who played Inara, played Black Canary on Justice League Unlimited, and Alan Tudyk was never in Justice League, but he was on Young Justice as Green Lantern, Green Arrow. And also, he has done like so much voiceover work. I think Alan Tudyk is mainly a voiceover actor who also happens to do a lot of live action work, but he spends most of his career in a voiceover booth or a mocap suit. So, like, I'm not worried about him doing the role. And I think Sean Marr has actually done voiceover work in some recent DC stuff. I believe he's played Nightwing a little bit. So, you know, I'm optimistic. As far as I know, Jewel State and Summer Glau haven't done a lot of voiceover, but everyone else, very prolific voiceover careers, most of which in a show I talked about in this video. And I'm sure I'll talk about more in future videos because I fucking love Justice League Unlimited. And I've been enjoying Teen Titans. You'll hear more about that coming up in another video in the future as well. But if you want to make sure you watch those videos, seamless segue, make sure you subscribe and ring the bell and like the video and leave a comment and let me know in the comments, do you have a favorite big bad from a season of television or a couple seasons of television who was not the main villain of the entire show? Let me know in the comments below. Was it Dr. Draken? I don't think Kim Possible had arcs in the same way. Was it the Monarch from Venture Brothers? Let me know in the comments who your favorite villain is from just a limited chunk of a larger story. But was it still the main villain? There's a video right here. Make sure you watch the latest episode of Critical Role Demystified. That had a lot of really useful advice for players, which works out well. I'm trying to go for this formula where the first video of every week is advice for players and the second video is for Dungeon Masters. We'll see how much I'm able to stick to that, but this week it kind of worked out because Critical Role Demystified, a lot of advice for players in that one, so check that one out right here. And until next time, play fair and have fun.